The man behind the desk did not look up when Ava Mercer sat down across from him, and when he finally did, he smiled the way people smile at a child who has wandered into a room meant for adults. He set her resume face down on the desk like a thing he had already decided about. 26 years of experience. 3 product launches that had earned the company more money than the man across from her would see in his life. A reference list with names that opened doors all over the city. He did not read past the line at the top, the line that gave her age away by simple arithmetic, the year she finished school sitting there in plain ink, and he did the math, the way men like him always did the math, fast and final. She was 54 years old. She had walked into that glass tower on a Tuesday morning with her good shoes resoled and her hands steady, and she would walk out of it 40 minutes later with a sentence in her chest that would not leave for a long time. If you have ever been told you were finished before you were done, stay with this one. You will want to see how it ends. His name was Garrett Vaughn, and he was 31, and he ran hiring for the strategy floor at a firm called Holloway Brandt, and he believed, with the calm certainty of a man who had never been wrong about anything that cost him, that he could read a person in the time it took to shake their hand. He leaned back, he laced his fingers behind his head. He told her the firm was looking for someone who could grow with the role, someone with a longer runway. And Ava knew that word runway, knew exactly what it was, a polite costume for. What? She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She asked him plainly whether he had looked at the launches, whether he had seen the names. Garrett glanced at the back of the page he had already turned over and said the thing that would follow him, years later, into a room he could not yet imagine. He said the market moved fast now, and he needed people who could keep up, and that, frankly, she was a little old to be starting somewhere new. He said it the way you would mention the weather. He even softened it at the end, the way cruelty likes to dress itself as kindness, and told her she had clearly done good work in her time. In her time, as if her time were a thing already closed and shelved, Ava stood. She thanked him for the meeting because her mother had raised her to thank people even when they had taken something from her, and she gathered her resume from the desk and slid it back into the folder she had carried in. At the door she paused, not to argue because she had learned long ago that you cannot argue a man out of contempt, but to look once more at the floor she would not be working on the rows of young faces lit blue by their screens, the city spread out behind the glass like something owned. Then she rode the elevator down 41 floors and walked out into the cold, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment with her breath coming white, and she looked across the street. Across the street there was an empty building, a squat brick thing, 4 stories, a faded sign for a print shop that had closed, brown paper taped over the ground floor windows. A for lease sign hung crooked in the door. Ava Mercer stood on that sidewalk with $63 in her checking account and a severance from her last company that had run dry 2 months back, and she looked to that empty brick building across from the glass tower of Holloway Brandt, and something in her went very still and very clear. She did not know yet that she was looking at the next 9 years of her life. She only knew that she was tired of riding down. Let me tell you who Ava was before that Tuesday, because the sidewalk moment only lands if you know what it cost her to stand there. She had grown up in a 3rd-floor walk-up with a mother who cleaned offices at night and a father she barely remembered, and she had learned numbers the way some children learn music, early and by ear. She put herself through a state school working the front desk of a hotel, and she took a job nobody wanted at a company nobody had heard of, doing the unglamorous arithmetic of which products would sell and which would sit in a warehouse until they were written off. She was good at it. She was better than good. Over the years, she built whole launches from a single notion and a spreadsheet, and she watched men with louder voices carry her work into rooms she was not invited into and come out with her ideas wearing their names. She married a kind man named Theo who fixed elevators for a living, and they had one daughter, Nia, and for a while the 3 of them lived in a small bright apartment where the radiator knocked and the windows fogged and there was always something on the stove. Theo died when Nia was 11. A heart that simply stopped on an ordinary morning, no warning, no debt of warning paid first. Ava went back to work 9 days later because there was a mortgage. And a child in grief did not pause the bills, and she carried both the years, the work and the missing, until Nia was grown and gone to nursing school 3 states away, and the apartment got quiet in a way Ava never got used to. Then the company she had given 2 decades to was bought, and the new owners trimmed the old growth first, and Ava, who had built more of that company than anyone left in the building, was walked to the door with a box and a handshake and a check that would last exactly 4 months. She spent 3 of those months applying. She was good on paper and better in a room, and again she watched the same thing happen, the small recalibration in a younger interviewer's face. When they placed her age, the sudden talk of culture, fit and energy and runway. She was not bitter, or she tried not to be, because bitterness was a tenant that paid no rent and never left. She kept her shoes resoled, she kept her hands steady. And on a Tuesday in February, she had her last interview, the one with the man named Garrett, and she rode down 41 floors, and she looked across the street. What she did next, no one who had turned her away would have predicted, because they had never once seen the whole of her. She went home and she did the thing she was best at in the world. She sat at her kitchen table under the knocking radiator and she ran the numbers. Not the numbers of her own ruin, the $63 and the rent due in 19 days. The other numbers. The market she knew better than the men who had dismissed her, the gap she had watched widen for years, while firms like Holloway Brand chased the same flashy contracts and left a whole quiet category of work uncovered. The small and mid-sized companies nobody bothered to court because the fees were modest and the glory was none. Ava had spent 26 years learning exactly where the money sat that nobody was bending to pick up. She called the only person who had ever told her she was meant for more than the floor she stood on. Her old mentor, a woman named Lorraine Pierce, 70 now, and retired to a house full of plants, who had run a division before women ran divisions and had hired a 22-year-old Ava off the strength of a single conversation. Lorraine listened to the whole of it, the interview, the word runway, the empty building across the street. Then Lorraine was quiet for a moment and she said the thing that changed everything. She said she had $40,000 she was never going to spend, and she would rather watch Ava build something with it than watch it sit in a bank being useless, and she asked only one thing in return, that Ava never once make anyone feel the way that man had made her feel. Ava wept at her kitchen table, quietly, the way she did everything, and then she wiped her face and signed the lease on the squat brick building across from the glass tower. She named the company Mercer Pierce, her own name first, because Lorraine insisted, and Lorraine's beside it because Ava insisted back, and the two of them argued about it for an hour, like the old friends they were. The first office was one room on the second floor, with a folding table, 2 chairs from Lorraine's garage, and a window that looked directly across the street at the lobby of Holloway Brand, where the young faces came and went in their good coats. She had no clients and no staff and a number in her account that frightened her at night. What she had instead was a list built from memory across 26 years of every small company she had watched go unserved while the big firms chased the big logos. She started calling. She made the calls from the folding table in the one-room office in the early morning before the owners got busy and the late afternoon when they finally had a minute. And for the first 3 weeks, almost no one called her back. She did not have a pitch deck or a brand or a website or a single thing, but her own voice on the phone, and twice in those first weeks she sat in that cold little room after a string of dead calls and let herself wonder, just for a moment, whether the man across the street had been right. Then she would touch the edge of the folding table and pick the phone back up. Her own voice, it turned out, was enough, because she did not talk to those small business owners the way the tower talked to them. She did not lead with credentials or runway or culture. She asked them what kept them up at night, and then she was quiet and she listened, really listened, in a way that startled people who were used to being sold to. She knew their problems before they finished describing them. She had spent her whole life being the person nobody listened to, the one whose ideas walked out of the room wearing other names, and she had learned in all those years of being unseen exactly how to see other people. Her first client was a family-owned bakery supply company, 3 neighborhoods over, run by a heavy-set, soft-spoken man named Walter Boyd, whose father had started it 40 years before and whose numbers had gone soft in a way he could not name. Walter had called 3 of the big firms and 2 of them had not called back, and the third had quoted him a fee that would have closed his doors faster than the problem itself. Ava drove out to him in a borrowed car because hers had been sold, and she sat at his kitchen table while his wife poured coffee. Neither of them could really afford, and she listened to him talk for an hour about ovens and margins and the warehouse, out back stacked with parchment liners he had ordered on a hunch that did not pay off. Most owners she met expected to be talked at. Ava asked questions instead, and she heard the exact place the money was leaking, the way a plumber hears the drip behind a wall. She named it in one afternoon at that kitchen table the same way she did everything, and she wrote it out for him in plain numbers on the back of one of his own invoices, the $18,000 a year he was bleeding into a delivery schedule built for a city that no longer existed. Walter looked at that invoice for a long time, and then he looked at her, and he asked quietly, why none of the others had seen it. She told him the truth, that they had not looked. She fixed it over the next 2 months, and Walter Boyd told 2 friends, and the 2 friends told 4, and the quiet category nobody had bothered to court turned out to be hungry for exactly what Ava had been told. She was too old to provide. Walter sent her a card every year after that, on the anniversary of the day she sat at his table, and she kept every one of them in the drawer beside the folding table. By the end of the first year, she had hired 3 people. Not the people Holloway Brandt would have hired. She hired a woman named Denise Carver, who had been pushed out of a marketing job at 58, told in a conference room with a window that the company was going in a younger direction, and who had spent 11 months after that watching her savings thin and her phone stay quiet. Denise walked into Ava's one-room office expecting the same recalibration she had met everywhere else, the small flicker when an interviewer placed her age, and instead Ava slid a problem across the folding table, a real one, and not in a client's pricing that Ava herself had not cracked, and asked Denise what she saw. Denise looked at it for 4 minutes, and then she saw it, the whole thing, faster than Ava had, and Ava hired her before she finished the sentence. She hired a young man named Curtis Hale, who had aged out of foster care at 18, with a garbage bag of clothes and no one waiting, who worked nights stocking shelves at a warehouse club and had taught himself accounting from library books he read on his breaks under the loading dock light. He came to the interview in a shirt he had ironed badly, and he answered every question too fast, the way a person does when he has decided in advance that the answer is no. Then Ava asked him where he wanted to be in 10 years, and Curtis stopped, because no one had ever asked him about his future as though his future were a real thing that belonged to him, and he cried, right there at the folding table, and apologized for it, and Ava told him there was nothing to apologize for and hired him on the spot. She hired Lorraine's granddaughter, a quiet girl named Joy Pierce, fresh out of school, careful and watchful, who reminded Ava so much of her own daughter at that age that her chest hurt the first week she sat across the room. She built the company the way no one had been willing to build a place for her. There was no runway talk at Mercer Pierce. There was no recalibration when an older candidate sat down. Ava hired the overlooked on purpose, the way another person might collect strays, except these were not strays. These were the most capable people in the city, walking around invisible because someone had decided they had aged out of being seen. She gathered them up. She gave them the floor. Would you have made that call to your old mentor, or would you have let the silence win? Ava almost let it win. The difference was $40,000 and a woman who refused to let her quit. Hold on to that because it matters how this comes back around. The second year was harder before it was easier. A bigger competitor, watching Mercer Pierce eat into a market they had ignored until it grew teeth, tried to poach Denise with a salary Ava could not match, and Denise sat in Ava's office, which by then was an actual office on a real floor they had taken over entirely, and she told Ava about the offer and waited. Ava did the thing that defined her. She told Denise to take it, that it was more money than Mercer Pierce could pay, and that Denise had a daughter in college, and that no loyalty was worth a person's security. She meant it completely. Denise looked at her for a long moment, and then she said no to the other firm, and she stayed, and she told Ava later that she stayed precisely because Ava had been willing to let her go. the tower would never have understood that. The tower thought people were runways. Ava knew people were people. Across the street, Holloway Brandt did not notice the brick building for a long time the way the large never notice the small until the small is taking food off their plate. They were busy with their glass and their logos and their young, energetic floors. Money keeps a record even when people do not. And year by year, the record bent. Contracts that would once have drifted to the tower drifted instead to the squat brick building across the street, where a 54-year-old woman who had been told she was finished was very quietly building the thing the tower had decided she was too old to be a part of. By the fourth year, Mercer Pierce had 80 employees and 3 floors and a name that meant something in the city, a name that meant if you were a real business with a real problem and you were tired of being talked down to, you walked into the brick building and you were heard. Ava had grown the median age of her staff to nearly 45, a thing she did without announcement and without apology, and the firm's results made a quiet mockery of every interviewer who had ever worried aloud about her energy. The work was the best in the city. Everyone in the industry knew it, even the people who would not say it out loud. She kept the original folding table. It sat in the corner of her office, the cheap one from that first room upstairs. And people assumed it was sentiment, and it was. But it was also a reminder, a thing she touched sometimes when a day went badly. Lorraine came to the office every Friday and sat in a good chair by the window with her tea and watched the floor full of people who had been told they were too much of one thing or not enough of another, and she would catch Ava's eye across the room and the two of them would not say anything because there was nothing that needed saying. Naya came home that fourth year, finished with nursing school, and stood in the lobby of her mother's company with her mouth open. She had grown up watching Ava carry grief and a mortgage on a back that never bent, and she had not known until she stood in that lobby that the woman who raised her had built something this large out of the worst week of her professional life. She found her mother on the 3rd floor, and she hugged her for a long time, and she said, "You did this," and Ava said, "We did this," and meant the whole crowded floor of people behind her. The company grew. The years turned. And across the street, the glass tower began, slowly, to come apart. It is not a dramatic thing, the unmaking of a firm like Holloway Brandt. There is no fire. There is just a slow bleeding of the work, contract by contract. To a competitor, they cannot quite bring themselves to take seriously until 1/4 the numbers cannot be explained away and the partners start asking hard questions in closed rooms. The firm that had chased only the big logos found the big logos drifting elsewhere too, because a reputation for talking down to people travels, and the brick building across the street had built the opposite reputation, brick by brick, year by year, out of exactly the kind of work the tower had thought beneath it. Garrett rose anyway for a while, because men like Garrett often rise during the years. A thing is still coasting on old momentum. He made junior partner at 34. He bought a car he did not need, and an apartment with a view of the river, and he kept hiring for energy and runway, and he kept turning away the candidates who reminded him of his own future. And he never once thought about the woman he had told she was too old, because men like Garrett do not remember the people they step over. They remember only the climb. The firm kept bleeding all the same. The partners brought in consultants, and the consultant said what consultants always say, that the firm had lost touch with whole segments of the market, that a competitor across the street had built an unassailable position in mid-market work, and that Holloway Brandt needed to either compete for that work or shrink. The partners chose to shrink the way the proud always choose, and the shrinking meant cuts. And the cuts, when they came, reached higher than anyone expected. They reached the strategy floor. They reached junior partners who had bought cars they did not need. Garrett Vaughn was 40 years old when Holloway Brandt walked him to the door with a box and a handshake and a check that would last a few months. He stood in the lobby. He had crossed 10,000 times, and he looked through the glass at the street, and for the first time in 9 years, he really saw the brick building across from him, the clean lettering above its door, the busy lit floors full of people. The name he had been hearing for years without ever once connecting it to a Tuesday in February, when he had turned a resume face down on his desk. He spent 4 months doing what she had done. He applied. He was good on paper and he interviewed well, and yet something kept happening that he could not name at first, thing he had never been on the receiving end of in his whole charmed life. He would sit across a desk from someone 15 years younger, watching them turn his resume face down, the way a person sets aside a thing they have already decided about, and he would see it, the small recalibration in their face when they placed his age against the year at the top of the page. He heard the word himself. Now, Runway said, gently across a desk in a glass room not unlike the one he had ruled, and it landed in him like a stone dropped down a long well. The first time he heard it, he did not understand why it sounded so familiar, why it carried the particular cold of a thing he could not quite reach. He went home to his apartment with the river view and stood at the window and could not place it. He heard it a second time from a woman who could not have been 30, who told him kindly that the firm wanted someone with more room to grow, and he drove home that night with his hands tight on the wheel of the car. He could no longer afford, and still he did not let himself remember because the remembering would have cost him the last thing he had left, which was the belief that he had always been one of the good ones. His severance ran thin. His apartment with the river view became a problem. And one morning, scrolling listings he was overqualified for and underwanted at, he saw that the best firm in the city, the one everyone in the industry talked about, the one in the brick building across from the tower that had let him go, was hiring for a senior strategy role that fit him like a glove. He did not know who ran it. He had never bothered to learn the name on the door. He sent his resume into the brick building across the street, and he put on his good suit, the one that still fit, and he walked across the street he had looked over for 9 years without ever crossing. He gave his name at the front desk and he sat in a warm, plain lobby with good light and old wood, nothing like the cold glass he had come from, no marble, no logo wall, just a long worn table and chairs that did not match, and a wall of photographs he did not look at closely enough to understand. Faces of people at desks, people laughing, people who looked, if he had bothered to notice, older on average than anyone on his old strategy floor. He sat there in his good suit, the one that still fit, turning his portfolio over in his hands, and he waited, and he rehearsed the confident version of himself he used to be without quite being able to summon it. He did not know that 2 floors above him a woman was looking at a resume with his name at the top, and that she had stopped and set down her pen and gone very still. Ava recognized it immediately. Not the resume, which was strong, the work solid, the launches real. The name. Bull. She sat in her office with the folding table in the corner, and she read the name, and she was 54 again. For one long breath, standing at a door she would not be working behind, hearing a man tell her she was a little old to be starting somewhere new. She set the resume down, she looked across her own office at the window that still, after all these years, looked across the street at the tower that had let him go the way it had once turned her away. She could have done a great many things in that moment. She could have left him in the lobby until he understood that no one was coming. She could have had Curtis send a polite rejection with the word runway buried somewhere in it, dressed as kindness the way his had been. She could have crossed the street herself finally after 9 years and stood in front of him and told him exactly who she was and what he had said and watched his face come apart. Lorraine, when Ava called her, said only, "Do what you can live with," which was the same thing Lorraine had always said, and which was never any help at all. And always exactly right. Ava went down to the lobby herself. Garrett stood when she entered because he was well raised in the small ways, even if he had been raised badly in the large ones, and he extended his hand and introduced himself, and he did not recognize her because men like Garrett do not remember the people they step over, and because 9 years and a built company change how a person carries herself, and because he had never really looked at her the first time at all. She shook his hand, she said her name. She watched the name land and not land, the way a thing you have buried does not come up just because someone says it once, and she understood, standing there, that he had genuinely forgotten, that she had been to him so small a moment that it left no mark. And strangely, that was the thing that hurt the most, and freed her the most all at once. She took him up to her office. She offered him coffee, which he accepted with the careful gratitude of a man whose certainty had been taken from him, and she watched him take in the room, the busy floors, the window that looked across at his old tower, the cheap folding table in the corner that he could not have understood. She asked him about his work, talked well, He was beneath the entitlement that the last 9 months had stripped from him like paint, genuinely good at the job, and Ava, who had spent her life seeing people clearly, saw that too. She saw a man who had been cruel without ever knowing he was cruel, who had measured people by their runway because no one had ever made him stand at the end of his own. Then she asked him the question she had been carrying across the street for 9 years. She asked him gently whether he had ever turned someone away that he should not have, not as an accusation, as a real question, the kind she asked because the answer told her everything about whether a person could be hired into a room full of the overlooked. Garrett was quiet for a long moment. And then, to his lasting credit, the credit that would matter more than he yet knew, he did not give the easy answer. He said yes. He said he had spent years measuring people by something that had nothing to do with whether they were any good, and that he had not understood it until it was done to him, and that there was a woman, years ago, he could not remember her name, whom he had told was too old to be hired, and that he thought about her now, since his own door closed. More than he thought about almost anything, because he finally understood what he had taken from her in 40 careless minutes. The room was very quiet. Lorraine by the window with her tea did not move. Joy, at her desk, outside the glass, had gone still. Ava looked at the man across her desk, the man who had unmade her on a Tuesday and built her without ever meaning to, and she felt the thing she had carried for 9 years finally set itself down, not because he had grovelled, but because he had told the truth when the easy thing was a lie. She did not tell him then that the woman had a name, and that the name was on the door he had walked under, and that the company he wanted to join had been built out of the exact sentence he had spoken to her. She did not need to. The truth has a way of arriving on its own schedule, and there was no kindness in forcing it. Early. She hired him. She hired him on a 90-day trial, the same trial she gave everyone, with one private condition she kept to herself, which was that she would watch how he treated the people at Mercer Pierce, who were exactly the kind of people he had once turned away. And she watched. And in those 90 days, Garrett worked beside Denise, who had been pushed out at 58, and learned more from her than from anyone in his 9 years at the Tower. He worked beside Curtis, who had taught himself the trade from library books, and he stopped, somewhere in the first month, talking about people in terms of their runway, because the runway in that building belonged to people the rest of the world had grounded, and they flew higher than anyone he had ever worked with. It was Joy who told him. In the end, not cruelly. She did not know the cruelty in it. She mentioned in passing one afternoon the story everyone at Mercer Pierce knew by heart, the founding story, the way the boss had been turned away across the street by some man who said she was too old, the way she had walked out onto the sidewalk with nothing and looked at an empty building and decided. Joy laughed, telling it, the warm laugh of someone who loved the ending, and she did not notice the colour leave Garrett's face, did not notice his hand go still on the desk, did not understand why he asked her, very quietly, what year that was. He understood then, all at once, the window that looked across the street, the name on the door he had never bothered to read, the folding table in the corner of her office, the cheap one she had kept all these years. The question she had asked him on his first day, whether he had ever turned someone away. He understood that she had known the whole time exactly who he was, and that she had hired him anyway, and that the not telling had not been a trap, but a mercy. The very mercy he had failed to show her in a glass office 9 years before. He went to her office. He stood in the door the way she had once stood in his, and he could not find the beginning of what he needed to say. Ava looked up from her desk and saw that he finally knew, and she set down her pen, and she waited, because she had waited 9 years and could wait the length of one more silence. He told her he was sorry. It came out plain and broken and without a single excuse attached to it. No talk of the market or the pressure or how young he had been. Just the bare sorry of a man who had finally stood where he had once made someone else stand. He told her he did not deserve the job and would understand if she took it back. He told her he did not know how she had been able to sit across from him and offer him coffee. Ava stood and came around the desk, and she did not raise her voice, because she never had needed to. She told him that she had not hired him to forgive him and had not hired him to punish him, but had hired him because he was good at the work, and because, when she asked him the truest question she knew how to ask, he had told her the truth at his own expense. She told him that the woman he could not remember had built all of this out of the sentence he could not remember saying, and that he should look around at the floor full of people the world had thrown away and understand that he was now one of them, and that this was not an insult, but the highest thing she could offer anyone. Then she told him the only thing she asked in return, the same thing Lorraine had asked of her on a night when she had $63 and a crooked FORLEASE sign across the street, that he never, as long as he worked under her name, make anyone feel the way he had once made her feel, that he learned to see the people the world had stopped seeing, that he carry it forward. Garrett stayed at Mercer Pierce. He was there 4 years later, and 7 running the very kind of hiring he had once done so badly, except now he was the one who looked past the year at the top of a resume to the work and the person underneath it, the one who watched a younger interviewer start to talk about runway and stopped them with a single quiet word. He became, of all the people in that building, the one who fought hardest for the candidate everyone else had written off, because he knew, better than anyone on the floor, exactly what it cost to be turned away at a door and exactly what the world lost when it happened. Ava grew older in the brick building she had filled with the overlooked. Lorraine passed in her 9th year peacefully in the house full of plants, and Ava kept her chair by the window, exactly where it had always been, and on Fridays she still sometimes looked at it and said the small things she would have said if Lorraine were in it. Nia married and had a daughter of her own, and the girl grew up running through the floors of her grandmother's company, climbing into the laps of people the world had discarded and found again. And she would ask, the way children do, why her grandmother kept the ugly little table in the corner of a big, nice office, the cheap folding one that did not match anything. And Ava would lift the child onto her knee in the office with the window that still looked across the street at the glass tower where it had all begun, and she would touch the edge of the folding table the way you touch a thing that saved your life, and she would tell her granddaughter that once, a long time ago, somebody told her she was finished, and that she had sat down at this very table with almost nothing and decided she was not. The tower across the street changed hands twice and finally emptied, its glass going dark floor by floor, and one autumn a crew came and stripped the old name off the front of it, and Ava watched from her window as the letters came down, one by one, the name of the firm that had told her she was too old to begin. She did not feel triumph. She had never been built for triumph. She felt only the quiet of a long account finally settled, the way you feel when a debt you stopped expecting to be paid is paid after all. Not because someone meant to pay it, but because the world, slowly and without anyone watching, keeps a record. And the record, given enough years, comes due. She kept the folding table until the day she retired, and then she had it carried carefully across the street into the empty lobby of the dark tower that had once turned her away, and she left it there in the middle of all that cold marble, a cheap small thing in a vast proud room, and she walked back out into the light. Somebody asked her later why she had done it, and Ava only smiled and said that everything ends up where it belongs eventually, and that she had simply helped it along. If someone ever told you that you were too late, too old, too far behind to begin, I hope you remember the woman who looked at an empty building with $63 in her account and built something the world could not look away from. And if you have a story like hers, the day you were counted out and the day you proved them wrong, tell it where someone can hear it. Somebody across the street might need to know it can be done.